So welcome to Should HE Marketers Be on the Board? This is a discussion I have been dying to have for quite some time. So been quite excited to be joined by these special guests today. So for people who don't know me, hello, I'm Penny Eccles. I'm CEO and founder of Marketing Partnership. And in these challenging times, we're getting lots of queries about how we can help with strategies to grow enrolments and student recruitment. So get in touch if you're interested. But to the main point of today, so delighted to welcome Caroline Bysh, who is Pro Vice Chancellor of Engagement at Glasgow Caledonian University. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Penny. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So wide remit, and you've worked both in Scottish and English higher education
That's right.
landscapes, and your current role covers external relations, marketing, and international and communications. Is that right?
Yes and no, but we can go into that.
Okay. Thank you. And welcome to Liam Owens, Pro Vice Chancellor of Marketing, Student Recruitment and Student Administration. Welcome, Liam.
Thanks, Penny. Thank you for having me.
And you've been 16 years at Edge Hill University, is that right?
I have,
Long
yes.
time. So different perspective. So you were formerly Director of Student Recruitment and Administration. And again, you have a wide remit also covering marketing, admissions, careers, communications, academic registry and the Arts Centre.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
And you both have quite a deep role in community and civic engagement, which we might come up to later. So why are we running this session and why am I so excited to have you here? Well, so for people who know me, I've worked in 7 institutions in leadership roles, and for most of those places that I worked in, the marketing role was not represented at board level or executive team level. And yet, as I progressed through my career, I would find myself at the executive meeting nearly every Monday, talking about student figures, talking about stakeholder engagement, brand profile, but was perplexed as to why there wasn't that senior role on the executive team. And in some institutions, there was no appetite whatsoever to even engage in that discussion. To me, as an aspiring marketer with great ambition, I found it a massive source of frustration. In my final HE marketing role, I was on the executive team. Was it all I expected? Well, we'll probably get to that later. But I thought this might be a topic that would interest other people because it interests me greatly. In today's landscape where student recruitment, brand profile, civic engagement, long-term strategic planning all involve marketing and external relations. Why aren't they always represented on the board? So great to have 2 people here who are represented on their executive teams. So first of all, Caroline, could you just give us a brief description of your career history to date and how you found yourself where you are now?
Yeah, with pleasure. Hi, everybody. So I've worked in higher education, higher and further education since I was 23. I started at the Leeds College of Music, and then I got a very rare thing, which was a graduate traineeship at the University of Essex. In postgraduate recruitment, publications, European recruitment, that kind of thing. So got that kind of full grounding within an external relations team. Really, really unusual, and I've not seen them in that many kind of places. Then moved out to Brussels because kind of thought it'd be fun to kind of just go and live somewhere else for a bit. And I worked for a marketing and communications agency that did media planning and buying for MBA programs and business schools. Brushed up my French, had some fun. And then I came back to the University of Reading a senior international officer and then was international director. And I was at Reading for 8.5 years and finished there as director of marketing, recruitment, admissions, and deputy director of external affairs until I was made redundant while I was on maternity leave. Now, you don't have to have had children to appreciate that would have been quite a vulnerable time in my life. And I'm not being really candid with you. It really broke me, and I think a lot of people in our kinds of roles, and particularly in this part of our sector, do these jobs because we really love it and because we really believe in it, and that we're marketing to produce brilliant people. And so that was quite a blow to my confidence and my sense of value and worth. So I regrouped for a bit, and then I set up as a freelance consultant, and I actually ran a really successful little business for about 6 years while my children were really small. And actually, that was the critical turning point for me, because I'd done work at director level, but the skills that you acquire as a consultant are really different. And you probably have the same, Penny, because actually what you're doing is you're reading a situation really quickly. You're reading a culture. You're reading whether strategic recommendations will stick in a particular organization. You understand quickly what's not being said, and you start to look at the kind of micro balances between decisions, and the presentation of often difficult issues at the most senior levels, and also being employed as an expert did huge amounts for it to rebuild my confidence, but actually made me more interested in working at the executive level, because I was perhaps erroneously was assuming that that was where all the decisions were taken and that I could be really influential. And I suspect we'll get into that a bit later. So actually I started to move into executive level work by being a former excellent specialist, but by actually being able to display broader generalist leadership skills. So I then took on a stopped consulting because, and I knew when I needed to stop, because I was handing over reports and wanting to hold on to them and kind of going, actually, if I could just implement this for you, I think we'd all have a good time. So which told me I needed to get back into institutions. So I took an interim directorship role at the University of the West of Scotland for a year, and then got my first exec level job at SIUC. I was there for 5.5 years, and then joined Glasgow Caledonian in January this year. But we'll get into portfolios and things. So it was linear, and then suddenly not.
Really interesting. And Liam, your career history.
Well, I mean, very, very boring in comparison, Penny. So also had over 20 years in the sector. Came out as a music graduate, taught music for a year, and then went into kind of outreach-related activity in a Liverpool-based university. Did that for 4 or 5 years, and a job at Edgehill came up in 2007 as the kind of head of outreach and ed liaison. So came at that point, and I think probably on average every 5 to 6 years something new got added to the portfolio. So the role's always been kept interesting. There's always been new things to kind of get to grips on, with recruitment, widening access, marketing, kind of academic registry stuff. I've been in this role for about just over 12 months, so September last year, when I moved onto the exec role. And I suppose one of the other things that I just would want to reflect on, Penny, is at the same time as kind of charting a course through that career path, also tried to do a lot in the sector as well, and in particular with Hello and a couple of stints of chairing that. And that was really valuable, because actually alongside the kind of career development bit, working with people who are elected with their own mandate from the membership to do their own things. So people that you are trying to lead and trying to move an organisation forward, but actually you can't tell people what to do because they've got their own mandate and their own remit. That was really, really instructional in terms of what it's like to operate an exec, where actually you're not in control of stuff. You're not, as Caroline said, you're not really making the decisions day to day. That's happening somewhere else. So that kind of the kind of non-job stuff, I think, has been just as important in the career development as the job.
I was just going to say, what I remember about you as well, Liam, I think when we were both in different roles, I remember hearing about you and contacting you, and I didn't know you at all. I don't know if you remember that phone call where I was asking for your advice, and you were just so, open and willing to give advice to somebody you didn't know. I think it's like keeping those networks open is really useful, isn't it? For people who are watching this, in 20 minutes time, we'll be opening for questions. So please do put some questions in the Q&A, and I will be fielding them at the end. So to you first, Liam, then, do you think it's important for our discipline to be represented on the board for in HE, or can it be represented equally well by, say, a chief operating officer role, as what happens in many institutions also. What do you think?
Well, I'm very biased, and I think yes, it should definitely be represented. Of course, it should. You know, you wouldn't have a kind of you wouldn't have a non-qualified financial person as your FD on the board. You know, and I think we have to recognise that marketing is a discipline, and it's a skill, and it is a profession in its own right. And it is basically, what is the university, what is it for, and how does it communicate that to the outside world? It's about purpose. So I think it's really important that this discipline is represented at board level.
Yeah, I think when we talked about this previously, I think you said you think it's useful to move the conversation on from marketing being seen as a cost.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's back to that kind of fundamental purpose bit, not the kind of titivation bit. And I think, you know, very often in institutions, I don't say this about my own, but as a reflection of, you know, lots of the other universities that I've got to know over the course of my career, that it's the kind of polishing up afterwards, isn't it, that marketing is seen as. And I think it's far more fundamental in terms of, you know, purpose and portfolio and why we do the things that we do.
Yeah, totally. A strategic role, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, Caroline, what do you think? Is this equally well represented by a chief operating officer, or does it need a distinct role?
It depends on the chief operating officer. There are going to be some who, depending on, you know, the areas that they've come through, who are very, very capable and able. But I think there can be a tendency, particularly at the chief operating officer level, that they look at how things would be operationalized. But I think they can often get into the detail, the money, the plan, how the project will look. How does that turn into a change project? Whereas actually, I think the skills that marketers bring are around the ability to look through multiple lenses at the same time. There's that kind of, we bring the kind of often a really powerful balance between data and empathy, because we can prove how things are going to play out, but also we can advise in a much earlier stages rather than, as you say, Liam, just, I mean, we've got something unpalatable to say, you say it, make it more palatable, rather than how will that play out? What is the narrative that we need to then put together? With all those subtle things that are backed up with the data, we know the subtlety about how a message will land with a particular audience, and that's our power. And there are, and actually, perhaps I do wonder whether, as a profession, we have a tendency to make it look really easy, so everybody thinks they can do it.
Yeah, I think sometimes, you know, universities suffer from do the comms syndrome.
Yeah.
They think, you know, we just do the comms, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's the long-term, you know, budgeting process, the long-term brand building process. But, you know, is it just me, or is it bonkers? You know, some universities are heavily reliant on tuition fee revenue, and heavily reliant on, you know, that the stakeholders and having advocates that will speak up for them. You know, surely there should be this representation on the board.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But I think again, I don't know necessarily whether universities by nature put their relationships first, and perhaps that's where that's the starting point that we bring of who needs to advocate for this, how do we build antibodies into a system that makes something more palatable further down the line. Like if you're doing major estates master planning and liaising with your local councils and authorities, you're building antibodies into a system in order that your strategic ends are met with as few ruffles as possible. And that's what we can do, often better than many others, because we see that whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the other things that we shouldn't fall into the trap of, Penny, is this kind of belief that marketing is all one way. The kind of doing the comms is all about everything that we push out. Actually, there's a really important job about listening to what comes back, actually, in that kind of, you know, in the way that kind of bats use sonar. Marketeers should be using the kind of stuff that's coming back, actually, to help inform the conversation around the exec table. And that is often the missing bit, I think.
And being that championing the student, championing the stakeholder, being that voice in the room. So Caroline, over to you. So any thoughts on what might stop a university from creating that CMO role or Pro Vice Chancellor role specifically aligned to external relations or engagement?
I think it can be sometimes urgency acute need in universities can make things very urgent, and they need something that's fixed now. And sometimes engagement external affairs things have a really long burn by their very nature, because it's about solidity and robustness of relationships and trust, deep trust, and often over a long period of time. And sometimes that can be hard to point to an ROI when you're dealing with a finance director who's like, yeah, but I've got the whole here. So actually, I could fill that with this kind of income. And actually, so it comes back to your earlier point, Liam, about being seen as an upfront cost. And I think this might be a bit unpalatable, but I think there can be a tendency to see it as fluff or spin, rather than being a deep strategic force that understands how your stakeholders will experience you in the short, medium, and long term. And so perhaps, and I suppose that's a bit chicken and egg, because the only way that you can encourage your exec team to see that is to put somebody into the space to kind of say, let me show you how this aspect of our profession works. But they won't invest in it until they see it. So so I think the doing the comms bit really resonated for me. Of, yeah, we've worked through this thing, and now you need to make it palatable, rather than what is the problem we're trying to fix, who are the people that we need to bring with us, and how would we do that? So I suppose it's not ignorance, because that's unfair, but maybe it can be a limited view of what marketing really is.
Yeah, I had quite a candid conversation once with a vice chancellor of an institution, where I just kind of questioned why perhaps were marketers not valued as much as they should be in institutions, or why in their particular institution wasn't there a marketer on the exec table. And that particular vice chancellor said, Penny, it's a bit too much like trade, and nobody gets involved in higher education because they want to be involved in trade. And I also heard that person also refer to marketing as the dark arts. So there's something there, isn't there? There's something there about perception, about what we do. And
feels a bit like sales.
Yeah.
And we don't sell.
Yeah. It's not, like you say, it's not palatable, is it?
Because it's a market.
Yeah. Liam, any thoughts about what's stopping? You are in an institution that does value this, but what might be stopping other institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have touched on a lot of it already. I do think there's a concern about costs, and that marketing will want to spend money on stuff, or kind of want to do mad stuff, and it's kind of often seen as a disposable thing, a thing that we can stop doing. And kind of touched on some of the kind of COO type stuff before, and I've been in difficult conversations about, well, we can just stop sponsoring that thing. We'll just stop it now, and it'll save X amount of money. But actually, kind of advocating for why we should keep doing that. And that kind of just concern, I suppose, that we create costs rather than save costs. There's probably a concern about marketing being the people that say no to stuff as well, actually, particularly on portfolio, which is, I'm sorry, Dean, but that is never going to sell. No one is ever going to buy that. And I think there's probably that concern, actually, that, that the kind of dark arts stuff that you talked about, not the dark arts stuff, but that kind of, the trading bit, I think is definitely a concern. But I also think there's a kind of fundamental failure to recognise that your brand is at every touch point. It's not just the prospectus. It's not just the website. Actually, it's all the stuff that people experience when they're talking, not just to your outreach team, but to your partnership team, or when they're engaging with the campus, whether that's through your art centre or your sports centre. All of that stuff is all about brand building. And I think just fundamentally that is not always understood.
Liam, do you think there are any issues where perhaps that marketing, communications, external affairs types are seen as risk takers? Because I was just wondering whether, the kind of, it was really struck by what you were saying about, there might be a perception that we're going to come in and ask for money for everything. Whereas in fact, almost invariably, and particularly now, I mean, it's changed so much over the last 20 years, but particularly now, every penny has to be justified with data, really rigorous insights. I love marketing sonar. I'm having that. But you've got to have listened back as to what's going to really get you the value for money. And I just wonder whether, because certainly I used to have more freedom to take more kind of speculative risks. And I feel that freedom has gone, but maybe there's a legacy perception that was still going to be a bit careless or reckless. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it's difficult to count some of it, isn't it? You can't account for all of
Definitely.
it. And I think there's also a bit of a concern, and this is probably symptomatic of having worked in one institution for a long time, but actually really get into the kind of heart of what is distinctive about you, and then being bold enough to say it.
Yeah.
That is a real challenge, So you get a lot of. We just need to be better known. Well,
Yeah.
known for what? Or for being good.
Yeah. It takes a brave person and actually quite a straight talking person, and maybe there's a fear of that. Maybe they don't want somebody who will be straight talking. They don't want somebody who they think is going to come in and spend millions of pounds, even though that is very far from reality.
Yeah.
So here's the killer question to you
Sorry,
both.
Penny, to interrupt, but I mean, just one thing which again I think is a perception and it's misplaced is that everything will be about a rebrand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they're going to redo the logo again. We don't want that, and it's unfair, right?
It's often the last thing we're thinking about, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So here we go. Here's the question for you both. Maybe you first, Liam. Was being on the executive team all you thought it would be?
No, it hasn't been. I suppose the thing that I would want to start by saying, Penny, is that I do recognise it's an enormous privilege actually to have an executive role and to have the title PVC. I suppose it really came back to me in July of this year when we had graduation, and I was kind of given a robe to wear that had like gold on it, and I got to sit on the front seat and wear a stupid hat. I mean, I haven't had that in my career before, and I suppose that kind of actually just that appreciation that this is a privileged position to be in. We should not underplay that. But you do get involved in a lot of stuff, and I think these roles, and marketing roles in general, but I suppose my reflection on the last 12 months is that this role has been a bit like being the university's priest, right? That you're there for all the big moments of celebration, you're right front and center and all of that stuff, but you're there in the really sad stuff as well, and the really hard stuff. And actually that almost a kind of pastoral role for your peers on the exec, actually around some of that kind of, I use the word advisory, but that kind of counselling and advice stuff, actually, I suppose, has probably surprised me at the extent to which those views are sought. It will depend on the executive team. It is a very small executive team here. So there's only 4 of us and the 3 deans. That's pretty small for a university our size, and it is very, very, very collegiate. So we make all decisions together. So I suppose one of the things that has been a real privilege is to have exposure to all sorts of stuff.
There's no training manual for that, really, is there?
There's no training manual for it, and it will be different in other places. And I do recognise that it's very kind of tight knit and collegiate here, but you do find yourself sucked into things that actually are nothing to do with the job. And I suppose my reflection is in the last 12 months, I've probably spent less time thinking and doing marketing and recruitment than I have at any point in my career.
Wow. And you, Caroline, is it what you thought it would be?
Yes and no. Really, so much of what you say, Liam, really resonates. Yes, in that it's incredibly satisfying to bring your expertise and challenge and insight into the room. Yeah, you can probably tell by my style, I am a fairly straight talking person. And that is really helpful because then you're dealing with questions and issues firsthand rather than being handed a decision and go, but if you'd just asked me, I would have advised you or counseled you that this might have been a different way to look at it. So that using your kind of powers of persuasion to bring kind of a more rounded approach to conversations. I suppose they're not necessarily downsides, but they're more surprises of what exec level work means. Absolutely agree with you, Liam. The stuff that you get into is not portfolio based, and actually more and more executive teams are working in a very porous way, that your portfolios are quite permeable, and that actually we find ourselves delegating sideways rather than down. You'll ask a peer to chair a meeting for you rather than asking a director to do that, and I really love that. I love that kind of collegiate, you have one another's backs, and you should be able to cover one another's portfolios reasonably well. For about, it sound credible for a short time if you don't have all the detail. But the things that surprised me were that you are always on. Not necessarily that you're always contactable, but you are always being observed. Particularly as a senior woman, you are always being observed. And so you have to be really careful of demeanor, tone. Even a bit of side eye at the wrong time is picked up and acknowledged. And so you're representing all of the time. And that with that comes a level of resilience that's required. And it's not it's an emotional resilience, but how you create the space to look after yourself in order that when you're in those really difficult conversations about, I don't know, student protests or major financial decisions, you've had some headspace. And particularly if you've got big gaps in your teams working with you, you're having to flip between the very generalist but also very deep decisions and into maybe a sort of almost down to head of marketing or marketing manager level, and that's a strain that you're dipping into serious detail and major strategic stuff. So you do have to look after yourself. The shift that I struggled with the most though was almost losing my professional identity, because moving into PVC role and with engagement rather than marketing communications or external affairs, I felt like I'd had to let that side of myself go in order to move into that management, more generalist senior leadership space. And it is thrilling and stretching intellectually. But I was like, well, who am I then? Where's my professional identity gone? I used to be the person who would know about those kinds of things, and I do, but there's other people who know often better than me because their knowledge is more current now. And so you have to have a level of leaving your ego at the door with big roles as well, because this is not the place for you to beat your chest. This is the place where you enable other colleagues to shine, and as you say, they get the glory, but you have their backs when when it hits the fan. And finally, and I think this is mainly because I'm particularly sensitive to this because I haven't always seen it done well, and that's the role of cabinet responsibility at the executive level. So where you have your big battles behind closed doors, but once you've taken your decision, you stand by that decision. And absolutely no, oh well, I didn't agree with that anyway. And I have seen that, and that really undermines the effectiveness and performance of the executive team as a whole. And that's quite a steep learning curve for particularly with newly formed teams to get to, but a really, really powerful position to get to. And that's a joy.
Well, just pondering on what you said, if I may share my experiences, thinking about what you said, Liam, about, do you actually do a lot of marketing anymore? And Caroline, you saying about, the resilience and learning a new game. I remember when I got into the executive team for the first couple of months, I floundered around. I really did. I didn't know what was happening to me. And I had a coach at the time, and she said to me, what got you here, what got you to this point might not get you any further. And it was a massive wake-up call for me that perhaps from this point onwards, I had to be and act differently. And I think perhaps people don't quite appreciate that when they're aspiring to that role. And so that leads me on to my next question. And just a reminder to everybody, please pop some questions in the Q&A for Caroline and Liam. I know that some people have joined this because they themselves are either hoping to become a Pro-Vice Chancellor, a CMO, or hoping to influence their own institutions to consider adding that role to their executive team. So what advice would you give to any senior marketer aspiring to that role? Whoever wants to go first can go first.
Go on, Liam.
Well, I do think the resilience point is really important. Actually, you have to think about how you will deal with a job that doesn't stop. And actually, I suppose one of the things that, and I did kind of know this, this wasn't a surprise to me, but the extent to which, if you are not in the conversation at the very beginning, it has run away, and then trying to then pull that back if you pick stuff up kind of after that's happened, that is really hard. So you have to kind of, you have to be prepared, I think, to work in that way. It will depend on the culture of your own organisation, of course. But I think one of the things that is really important, it kind of takes me back to the hello point that I was talking about at the top of the webinar, to think about that matrix style of working, where things that you will be asked to do, not your sphere of expertise, and often you'll be leading people where you can't tell them what to do, or you can't tell them what the answer is, but that ability to kind of get to the position that you need to, but without being, in control of all the decisions, that is something that I'd encourage everyone to really think about. How can you demonstrate that in your day-to-day job now? What are the things that you can do that will show a future employer that you can lead without having the authority? Because that's really
put that into practice. Yeah. Caroline.
I love lead without having the authority. That's such a it's a tough one to recognize, which position you're in and where the power really lies. For me, I'd say think really carefully about what you want to be at executive level for. Because when we were having a kind of a pre-meet, Liam said, if you think you're going to be in the room to make the decisions, forget it. And I was like, yeah, he's absolutely right. So you have to think about what is professionally fulfilling and nourishing for you. So for me, the pleasure of working at the executive level is the intellectual stretch and and actually it is the broadness of the portfolio now. It took a bit of a shift, same as you, Penny. A good 6 months, I think, for me to finally find my feet. But so it is about professional nourishment, what you really want to get out of it. And you may not like it, and that's all right too. You may kind of go, well, I'll try it. There are quite a few people who go, no, that's really not for me. You can have all of that burden. I actually really love doing that, but you won't know unless you try it. So I would say definitely think about what looking more generalist would look like for you, and where there might be some gaps there, rather than moving away from the specialist into demonstrating. But also I'd be aware that the balance of decision making is very different at the executive level, because often when you're running a kind of technically a smaller portfolio, you're making a reasonable decision between one obvious thing and another obvious thing, whereas at the executive level you're making lots of micro balanced decisions where you might be taking some things where your values and principles may need to come more to the fore, and your financial processes have to adapt according to how you want to be. Or there are going to be other areas where those values and principles may be challenged because you've got a financial sustainability issue which is more acute. And so they're not always clear-cut things. That's part of the intensity and load at the executive level, which requires that emotional resilience. But don't be frightened of it. It's thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, we probably haven't said enough of this, but I get the sense that you both love what you do. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so all that striving, was worth it, I guess.
Most of the time. There of course there's with every job there are some days where you go, just get it done.
Yeah.
Just get it done. And then there are other days you have those moments of, that's what I'm here for. That was the difference I wanted to make, and those are really joyful.
Yeah, I love the concept of professional nourishment. That's what we're all here for, isn't it? Really, that's what we're striving for. Okay, so we've got one question so far, but please do add some of the questions if you're interested. So the first person says you're preaching to the choir here, but the session is no less valuable for that. It's giving us good insight and ammunition. But what are your options and platforms for championing the cause of marketers at the top table? It's a tricky one. What can you do to champion that?
I mean, I think there are things that you will be able to do in your day-to-day role. It kind of goes back to that kind of matrix thing as well, where you can make a decision or champion a cause or make a suggestion that might not be in your own best interest, but are in the best interest of the university, and that gets noticed. Really does get noticed.
Taking on that strategic role instead of being self-interested, I guess.
You've got to put your hand up for stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, the more difficult, the better.
I think that's a great bit of advice there, actually, and it because it gets to more a place of strategic counsel than but this is what I want. That, and you're right, Liam, that does get noticed, where you're become respected as a dispassionate voice. I was wondering whether the question was actually trying to point to, I don't really have any avenues to get this voice heard at the executive level. You know, I don't know how to get through the bureaucracy, and sometimes finding unusual allies can be really helpful. Get your CFO on side.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's so critical, because often they can be the most black and white people, and often in marketing we're dealing with shades of grey. But when you if you find the allies who may so again, you need to look where the power lies sometimes, and spend some strategically designed time with the people who are normally your naysayers, or the people who will knock things back. So if you work on a premise of maybe 80% of the business is done outside of the room, who do you need to get in touch with outside of the room first?
Yeah, building those relationships. I think I was guilty of thinking that everything happened in the room, and unless I was in the room, I would never have any influence. But actually, when I reached the room, I realized that even the people in the executive team were having other conversations, corridor conversations or formal conversations, that were constantly shifting the dial. So, in fact, it was very naive of me to think that I had to be in that particular 2-3 hour slot on a Monday morning. Your influence can be a lot greater than that if you know where to use it. If it's of any use, I'm on the board of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and across all sectors, this is a live topic: how to get marketing represented on the board, because even in the commercial sector, it's not always naturally there. Okay, so another question. At the exec level, oh, this is a good one. How is work-life balance, and how do you manage this? Caroline?
Depends on who you talk to, because I work with some colleagues who have an appalling work-life balance. I'm not going to lie. They put in crazy hours, and they always do, and they're always being, checking in from holidays and things. I am really strict with my boundaries. I've learned to be. I have 2 young children, and playing, singing in a band. Maybe they're having a set of bongos behind me as part of the. So I have a side hustle. So, and that time, that creative outlet is really important to me, because otherwise that's the time where my brain can't deal with anything else. I'm tuning and playing and singing and that kind of thing. So having outside interests is really important, but I'm very, very strict with my boundaries. We have an exec WhatsApp group, and that's for urgent things. And my boss has my personal my boss and my COO have my personal phone, and they text sometimes. But so by the time I walk home, when I go through the door, my work phone is somewhere else. So otherwise I'm not present. And then I feel like I'm both a bad parent and a bad colleague and a bad wife and daughter and all of those things. So I can end up feeling that I'm doing none of those things really well, which is, as the type of I'm the anxious overachieving head girl type of person. So I really worry that I'm doing things badly. So boundaries really important. I lift quite heavy weights. That's really important to me too. And I only need to do it for 15-20 minutes, and it's got a lot out of my system. And I break up my journeys as well, because it's quite a long way from where I live into Glasgow. So my first half hour of the day is my podcast in, staring out of the window into the void, and then my work day begins. So I'm really quite delineated with my time. And I try to make sure that I've downloaded everything from my brain before I go to bed, because otherwise I'll just stew. It'll stir around. Add perimenopause into that, you're done for. So you really have to. It's strictness of boundaries for me, but that's a hard lesson learned.
It sounds like it's quite a deliberate strategy. These things don't
Absolutely.
happen by accident, do they? You have to manage the work-life balance. Liam, I know you. Yeah. Well, you answer it.
Hopeless. I wish I could have that discipline. And I live with someone that absolutely does have that. He has a senior role as well in a FTSE 100 company, and he's very much kind of like, I don't check anything on holiday. When I've finished, I've finished. I find that really difficult, because, just candidly, part of the job is part of who I am. It's part of my identity,
Absolutely.
and kind of want to be doing it, and I love doing it, and I find it very difficult to draw the boundaries in a way that listen to Caroline and I feel entirely envious. I live about an hour away from work, so that journey is really important actually. And I come in 5 days a week, don't do anything hybrid, but actually the journey to and from work is really important. And at least 3 days a week, I will pick the children up from after school. Got young children as well that are 5 and 8. So that is quite a good discipline to be able to do that, because it takes an hour to get to nursery and you get fined if you're late. So having to leave at 5 o'clock I use that. But I also try and decide which nights of the week I'm going to kind of log on after they've gone to bed, and try not to do it every week. It depends every night.
Yeah.
Depends what's going on. But also I tend to do Saturday mornings as well, because there is a lot to do. It's kind of one of the downsides of having a very small team. But I suppose my advice would be, in terms of getting some of that work-life balance, is you will start to decide what matters. And there's a lot of stuff that just does not matter.
Agreed.
That can suck all of your time. You've got to work out where to draw the line on that stuff.
I might add one other thing, particularly at the executive level, and that's effective executive support, and the role of exec support teams in enabling the exec to be at their best, and how much. So, as you can tell, relatively candid. I share a lot with my EA. She sees when I've got school appointments and hair appointments, all right through the whole of the week, including my weekends, so that she knows what load I'm carrying, and then she helps to block out time to get stuff written, because once you get into the committee cycles and bureaucracy and all of that, it's relentless sometimes, and you don't even have the time to think. So the better informed your support is, the more of a team you become, and the more protective, the more protective of your time they can be. And so there are some times where Fiona will just go, I wouldn't advise doing that, Caroline. And what she means is, are you mad? You're gonna try and run from Glasgow to Edinburgh and then back to there to do that, and then go to a ministerial meeting in the meeting? I wouldn't advise that, Caroline. That's when I know I'm being slapped. But the role of really having the guts to use your exec support in the ways that they really are there to help you, that's critical.
And I don't know if I dare ask you this to answer this in 1 minute, Caroline, but with a colleague has written here, I really appreciate your candor, Caroline and Liam. Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you as well. Caroline, can you share a little bit more about when you were made redundant and how you rebuilt your confidence? If you can do it in a minute.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, let's give it a go. It took me about 2 years to rebuild my confidence, because I was at home with a 7-month-old baby, was ready to go back to work, and the opportunity was taken away. So what I did, compartmentalizing really helps. I processed it in stages. So my first priority was no gaps on my CV. Set up my company for the day that I signed my redundancy letter. So even if it wasn't true, if I wasn't working, there were no gaps on my CV, and that helped my perfectionist. This is how it looks. I did get quite a bit of counselling and coaching. Talked a lot about it. Ranted and vented quite a lot too. And had some fun with the redundancy money as well. It wasn't just penance money. That was there because I deserved to look after myself with that. But it just took time, and I leaned on my network. Lots of old friends really came out of the network, offered me work, looked after me. So, and that's one of the things I love about this sector. By God, we're there for one another.
Oh, and a perfect ending to this session. Thank you so much. I have enjoyed this as much as I thought I would, and more. I can't say thank you enough for you being so honest, and I'm sure people who've been listening and have attended have really appreciated that. So thank you both very, very much. Got lots of claps and cheers.
Yeah, see that.
This is our last webinar of the year. If there's anything that you think we should do in the future, drop me a note. I'd be really grateful to get your feedback on how the webinars have gone for this year and what we should do next year. But finally, thank you, Caroline and Liam. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.